This is Eating Crow with Pete Durand.
Everyone, welcome to another thrilling episode of the Eating Crow podcast. Jared Greer is our guest today. Hi, Jared.
Hey, Pete. Thanks for having me, man.
We've known each other for almost a year and a half, 2 years now, I think. And we've been working together on a couple different projects you have going. And finally, we just looked at each other and said, why are you not on this podcast? You've done some incredible things, way cooler things than I've ever done at your age. So that's the whole point of the podcast, is to get people on who've done cool things. And you just did something really cool that we'll talk about. You just ran 100 miles in the Grand Canyon.
100 miles in Grand Canyon. Yep.
And it wasn't just like in the bottom of the canyon. It was down into the canyon, out of the canyon, and then back and forth a couple times.
Just a couple. Yep.
We're going to get to that in a little bit, because that is a physical accomplishment very, very few people in this world will ever do. So I don't know if I recommend it in your 50s, but when you're about to turn 40, it's a good idea.
There you go. Just barely before 40. There's a small window.
And it was a family thing. We'll talk about that as well. So Jared, you've got an interesting background. To me, the reason I wanted him on the show is there's a lot of overlap. We're doing this for leaders and entrepreneurs, but everybody knows that I'm a big family guy, right? It's an important part of my life. In fact, it's your business. It's what you're doing. And that's kind of how we ran across each other. I thought your messaging was really spot on, and you've really dialed it in. So we're going to talk about how your business is growing. Help me understand, help the people that we're talking to understand kind of where you grew up, and talk about your family, your brothers who have had a big influence on who you are. And that'll help us kind of set the stage for what you're doing today.
Yeah, gosh, sharing my background probably will shed a lot of light. I grew up in Utah, Provo, Utah. We had 8 kids. And there's a lot of times, Pete, where I think my parents, they got married and then they just sat down at the kitchen table. They wrote out all the chores that they wanted done in the house. And then they just took a step back and said, we need 8 kids. And I think that's how we came to be.
They brought in a staff.
I mean, really, I think from the time I was very, very young, we were doing chores. We were making dinner. We were cleaning. We had a chore chart. We always knew what we were supposed to be doing. Every Saturday, we did yard work outside. And what's interesting is we were not wealthy at all, but somehow we lived in a really wealthy area. Stephen Covey lived less than 2 miles away from us. So we were in a very wealthy area. Everybody around us was doctors, lawyers, dentists, the whole nine, but we were very poor. I remember we had a hole in our front door from people coming in and out of it so much and kicking the bottom. It started to stick, and we'd kick the bottom corner, and eventually it had a hole that in the wintertime in Utah, when you got tons of snow, you would feel the draft coming through that hole because it had been kicked so many times by people coming in and out. That's kind of like where I came from. Those are like the roots. And that's a lot of why I think I do what I do today, because I grew up in a place where I became very observant of everybody around me.
So where were you in the stack of 8 kids, by the way?
So I was 6th. So I've got 2 little brothers,
okay,
and then 3 older brothers, and then 2 oldest sisters.
And are you close to the other 7 siblings to this day?
Yeah, for sure.
Great.
For sure. So my parents were divorced when I was 11.
Okay.
And it was a really ugly divorce. Again, the area that we lived, like that kind of stuff didn't really happen.
No, I spent a lot of time in Utah. That doesn't happen there.
Yeah. So it was definitely maybe a sore spot in the community, I think, a little bit, but it also bonded us together. My dad got remarried about a year later, and he brought in a step family that we were very, very different than.
Yeah, because some of them were probably almost out of the house at that point.
Some were out of the house, and many of us, like, we had lived a very kind of rigid life up to that point. And then once divorce happened, it seemed like the standards were just erased, just gone. And so it was kind of a weird feeling of like, wait, now we can watch The Simpsons? Like, that's okay?
And
now we're buying like store brand cereal, like the name brand cereal. We're buying that now. Okay.
I can sleep in the ball pit at McDonald's. Okay.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Right. Anything goes. That's kind of how it felt.
Again, back then, and particularly in Provo, Utah. And by the way, one of my favorite lines from The Week Fletch is Marvin, Thelma, and Provo, 3 names I enjoy. Watch it. It's a great movie. So anytime I hear the word Provo, I just smile.
Fletch. Yep.
But, mixed family. So did you live with your step family? Did they live with you guys?
Yeah. So again, and very uncommon, my dad got full custody. So we all lived with my dad. My mom just didn't really have a way to provide for us.
Sure.
And so we lived with my dad, which was complete backfire of what my mom thought was going to happen. And so we lived with my dad, and then our step family And so there's this weird attempt to blend these two families that were like oil and water. I mean, just very, very different.
Today, do you keep in touch with any of your step siblings?
So again, it kind of depends on where you were in that kind of realm. Like my little brothers are much closer with the step siblings than I am. And then the ones that are still in Utah, they get together. I don't really stay in great touch with them. I always kind of think of my family as, our 8 kids and my mom and my dad. And some of that might just be from trauma or something, but
do you stay in touch with your parents?
Yeah. So very close with my dad. My mom actually passed away when I was 16.
Not long after. Wow.
Not long after she came down with breast cancer. It was actually the second time she had breast cancer.
Wow.
They gave her 4 months to live because she couldn't take care of herself. She ended up in a resting home and she actually made it about 18 months, so a year and a half.
Wow. Fighter.
Definitely a fighter.
You think about the early years growing up and then the changes in your family dynamic, and anybody that's gone through divorce as a young child recognizes the significant change that is. But the fact that, up until that point, it was very structured. You had chores, tasks, whatever, and then boom, the gloves are off, right? The chains are loose. You're free. That can send a lot of people in different directions. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to pull them back. So when you think about your passion for parenting for kids, and we'll talk about your transition from your career, right, where you were grinding and going for success and into the point where you ended up in North Carolina, you looked around and you're like, how do I just embrace this? And how do I help other people embrace this? Talk about your time at the University of Phoenix as a student and eventually working there. And what is it at the point of that? I think it was around an 8-year career where you said to yourself, we got to make a change.
Yeah, a lot there. If I think about just the foundation of it all, I remember I asked my dad years later, I was probably 22. And I asked my dad, hey, as you look at those times and you think about our family, what would you do differently? And he said something, Pete, that I will never forget and that I use and share all the time with people. He said, I didn't understand the difference between principles and practices. As I looked through that lens of like, okay, my parents were great at teaching practices. Do this, do that. But they were not great at teaching principles. The why behind it. What is the principle there? Be honest. So fast forward, my spiral was very much, at that point, after my mom passed away, I was never a good student. I wasn't doing well in school. And because of where we lived, honestly, I felt like I had kind of hit the ceiling. I had some really amazing mentors that started to help me understand my potential. And I started to turn the corner, but I still wrestle to this day a little bit with, like, am I this guy who can have this type of success or that type of success? And I think that's probably some of the demons that maybe I'll probably fight forever. Mm-hmm. So fast forward, I stayed at University of Phoenix. I took a role over in the DC metro area. We covered the entire DC metro area. So I could get some real business experience versus sitting in a call center in Arizona where I had kind of began. I was a senior director at the time. Almost from the day that I got to Virginia in 2011, we started laying people off. And eventually we had 100 and something people when I got there and 8 managers. And when I was laid off in 2013, we had 1 manager and 7 employees. So we had just been hacking away at it. I left there to go work at a consulting firm, which is a whole different set of experience there. Yeah. But it showed me that the grass is rarely greener somewhere else. And there's not really any business or any industry that's secure or safe or protected or untouchable like we thought. Because then I started working with companies all over the world and seeing that they also had, in many cases, poor leadership, poor decision-making, market, headwinds that they had to face. And so just really opened my eyes to a lot in that perspective that kind of said, well, does it really matter what I do if any job, any industry is going to have those types of headwinds? I may as well do something that I love.
And during that time, you kind of had a fast rise at University of Phoenix during a time when the market was really big. Then you shifted into a couple different consulting roles when you got to be exposed to different companies around the world. Were you feeling like you were maintaining the balance at home as well? Did you feel like that was intact, or were you starting to struggle with those things as well? And did that start to shape where you are today?
So if I had to say what really shaped, so 2010, actually, before we even moved to Virginia, we were living in Arizona. We were actually expecting our first baby. And my wife was pregnant. And on a Sunday afternoon, she said, I haven't felt the baby kick.
This is a tough one, isn't it?
So we went to the hospital to look to see, and the nurse, we'd actually had trouble getting pregnant in the first place. And so we had used fertility treatments. And so we knew, ultrasounds very well. We know what to look for. We know we just were very adept to what happens there. And so the nurse came in, started doing the ultrasound, could not find a heartbeat. She scurried out. 2 more nurses come in, looking. They leave. Another 2 or 3 nurses come in, and finally the room is empty. And everybody knew we had lost our baby, but nobody had said it.
How far along was she at this point?
She was 3 days from our due date.
Oh my God.
So our son was stillborn. We delivered him. At that point, my career was a rising career. Just felt like we had everything that we wanted, everything that we needed. We had bought a house. We'd been married for just a handful of years, 4 years. And in that moment, you just know what matters. You know what's important. When you're holding the lifeless body of your baby, you realize what matters, and none of the other stuff matters.
Step back a little bit. I've seen you've done one post on this topic before, right? Losing your son. And any parent that's listening this, their heart sank right when you described that, right? Because there's 9 months of anticipation, 9 months of joy, 9 months of everything you're imagining as a parent. And all of that's gone in the moment. And I've talked to other people that have experienced this, and they didn't get to what you got to just as quickly, which is in that moment, I realized what mattered in life. Now, fast forward today, you're blessed with how many kids, Jared?
Now we have 4 additional kids. So yeah, we're blessed for sure.
Lovely kids,
yep.
Right?
Yep. Right. Two girls, 2 boys.
And I wanted to drill into some of these things in your past, your childhood, and particularly that event that I think really shape. And I want people to understand this. When you talk to a life coach or a business coach, any type of a coach, you have to ask where they're coming from. Yesterday, we actually had a meeting before the podcast, and until you can really understand where someone's coming from and why they're talking to you about what they're talking about, it's difficult to respect their ability to be your coach. So let's talk about, we're going to shift gears kind of halfway through the podcast now into this basis, this foundation you started from. Why are you so passionate, and who are you trying to help in your coaching business on LinkedIn? And then let's drill down into what that audience looks like.
Just thank you for sharing your experience, because those are the experiences that if we allow them to be, they can be those really pivotal moments. Mm-hmm. And we both had a similar outcome of a different kind of input, right? Very different scenarios, yet at the same time, we both came out with like a keen focus of what really, really matters. And that's the passion. Yeah. I want to help working parents who might be thinking, hey, I know I need to do better, but right now I've just got to focus on my career. I want to help them learn that they can do both.
Yeah.
They don't have to focus on just their career and neglect their family. You can do both. My hope and the mission of Greer Method is to help those working parents be equipped with the tools and strategies that they need to be able to do both.
And back to the comment where you and I or any other parent would typically say, I would give anything to have that moment back with my child. What parents don't realize, they don't realize this, and this is a big part of your message, is if you were to ask your children, would you rather have daddy or mommy get a promotion, or would you rather if I'm home with you? Their answer is going to be, I wouldn't want my mom and dad home with me. They don't process, especially at younger ages, money, and they process time and quality, period, and memories and moments. And no parent looks back. It's so cliche, right? You don't look back in your deathbed and go, I wish I'd spent more time at work.
Indeed. Right? And we also have to acknowledge that for some kids, all the time is not going to be enough. They're still going to be like, Dad, why do you have to go in the bathroom for 3 minutes while I'm out here ready to play? I understand there's also this idea that like our kids sometimes are insatiable. And so we've got to build those correct boundaries around our time so that we can get it all done. And that's where it gets tricky. And that's where parents will lean heavy into their career, and then they'll swing so far over into the parenting where they're actually not doing good parenting because now they're parenting out of guilt.
By the way, there have been moments where, I have not been able to attend one of my kids' games, and it's a good discussion. Hey, I get to whatever games I can, and I will never miss a game because I didn't want to be there. Sometimes I will miss a game because I have to be somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's part of my job. It's part of my responsibility. And you need to understand it's okay for you to go to the game by yourself. You'll be fine. We'll talk afterwards. Tell me how it went. What we talk about, and I coach a lot of my teammates and especially people in the companies I built. I don't ever want you to feel like you're here at work because you feel guilty you need to be here. You should work because you have to, right? If there's something critical And we should be able to run at a common level that every once in a while, everybody's got to jump down, dig a little harder, and maybe work some extra hours, but that can't be the constant expectation. And there will be events that you need to be at that are important for your children. We should all make that happen. But obviously there are sacrifices that have to be made, and it's good for your kids to see you work hard. And it's maybe good for your kid to see you go to work on a Saturday once in a while or crank some extra hours out. Then they have that work ethic when they're at school. And when they get their first jobs, right? You want your kids. I've always told my kids, I don't care if you're the best employee. I just want you to be the hardest working employee. I don't care if you're the best soccer player. I just want you to be the hardest working soccer player. I will never comment if you miss a shot. I'll comment if I saw you kind of lay off on one.
Right? Yeah, right. There you go.
My kids know it. My feedback for them after games is usually pretty straightforward. So then when I give them a compliment, they really take it for some value. So let's talk about, Jared, you've really done a great job of constantly testing your thesis and your message and finding where the audience is resonating with what you're doing. Help us understand, help the audience understand who's the right audience for your coaching.
We primarily focus on working with married working parents who are also often business owners, executives, founders, because they're the ones who are more prone to maybe get distracted with the career stuff. And then vice versa, parent sometimes by guilt. So really, truly helping them to define those boundaries, manage both aspects of it. That's kind of our sweet spot.
Let's tap into another part of, we talked about right at the beginning, you just did this 100-mile race. We had a good discussion yesterday about how to weave this into the podcast, because 100-mile Grand Canyon race is something that 1% of the people in the world will do. And it can be intimidating for the people you're coaching to think, I'll never be Jared, right? That's not the point of you doing this. The point of your messaging when you're teaching people to find a way to manage their work life and their home life. And when people use the word balance, it's kind of a strange thing. I don't know that there's ever balance. I think in any given time, your home life and your work life are in crisis. There's very few times in our life where you can look and go, yeah, I feel pretty balanced.
Yeah.
This is easy. No, it doesn't happen. So I think what you're trying to tell people is that when you did this 100-mile run, for you, it was a way to test your boundaries, to push yourself into a very uncomfortable zone. You're a very elite athlete. So for you to push yourself means you probably have to go to more extremes than someone who hasn't exercised in 5 years, right? For that person, just walking their first 5K is going to be like a Grand Canyon run. So I want to make sure people understand you have this concept of scope. You have this concept of their current situation. So let's use a scenario. Let's say I'm Pete, and I see one of your things on LinkedIn, Jared, and I reach out and I say, hey, Jared, look, I've got 3 kids. My wife and I both work. They're entering their teens, and I feel like I'm missing everything. Like I feel like I'm missing. I'm not present at work because I'm going home and I've missed an event. My wife's stressed because she's working and she got home, and we both look at each other like, well, what's for dinner? And she's like, I didn't have, there's this constant tension about who owns what. And it's really needs to be a more collaborative set of responsibilities. Both of us don't feel good. Our health is drying. It's just not there. Where do we start, Jared? Where's the first place we would start to get back on track?
Love that, because that's very in sync with what a client would tell me the first time.
Okay.
And I would say, okay, you just listed out about 8 things that need work.
Right.
Which is most important to you? That's where I would start very, very first, right? Because you talked about health, you talked about collaboration, you talked about, being present with the kids and juggling work and home. So we would I would suss out very first, like, what is most important to you? If you're looking for a place to start, you start with being consistent. Now, how do we be consistent? We zero in and we break that apart into what we call the core 4. And that's being really clear on your vision, meaning what am I trying to accomplish? Big picture, what am I trying to accomplish for my career, for my family? Little picture, what am I trying to accomplish right now in this moment, in this argument, in this conflict, in this discussion, in this dinner with my family? What am I trying to accomplish? And then our values, that's how do we need to show up in a way that protects what's most important? So if our family we say is most important, then I might need to be more assertive at work. So always we start with teaching those principles that in any given moment, you can ask yourself, what am I trying to accomplish right now? Who do I need to be? What do I believe about myself, others, my circumstances? And what action do I need to take right now? And people can try this tonight. Sit down at dinner and ask yourself with your family, what do I want out of this? And you might say things like, I want to have a engaging experience with my family, or I want to have a positive conversation. Well, then you go to your values. Well, you may need to be more curious. You may need to listen better. You may need to be more patient or present. And then the beliefs, you want to root out the beliefs of, well, my teenagers don't want to talk to me, or missing one dinner won't matter.
Mm-hmm.
We want to root that out. So we want to turn that into an empowering belief of, if I share some of my day, or if I talk about my difficulties, other people might share. And then the actions we take when we believe that is we share, we're open, or we ask questions, and we create that alignment between those core four. That creates consistency. You do that across time. And then when we start to layer in, well, here's some tools that actually you can use these tools to be more influential, more persuasive with your family, or even to be able to build more confidence in yourself or more courage. And that's where growth happens. And that's where sustainability happens, versus these times where people are like, okay, cool. For 1 month, I'm going to just throw everything I've got at this, burn myself out, and default back to this terrible place next month because I just exhausted myself.
Yeah. And back to what we talked about yesterday, I gave you a scenario with 8 different things that were wrong that need to be addressed. Any one of the 8 is a long-term continuous improvement process. You're not going to fix this entire problem overnight. And really intuitive comeback question to me, which is, Pete, what's the most important thing right now that you're dealing with that is causing and contributing to the other 7, right? There's going to be one that impacts all of them. I'll just share my personal experience from observing in working with people, both as a trainer and as a bit of what I'll call a counselor, whatever you want. And just from our own family experience, I give a lot of credit to my wife on how our family has evolved, because she was adamant from the beginning that we will always have a family meal together. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it's such a simple concept that is so forgotten in today's society, because you talked about this at the family meal. And what you did is have our kids do their homework when they were young at the kitchen table or at the counter, right? While she's making dinner, and hopefully I'm home in time to at least be part of that process. Mm-hmm. And she's got like Frank Sinatra or Nat King Cole classic music on in the background. And airlines are starting to pipe this music in now. When you land, you fly in a Delta flight, they pipe this calming classical music in because they've discovered it calms people. At the onboarding process, when people want to go and they're cutting in front of each other and being rude, it calms people. So my kids have this appreciation for music in their lives. It's calming music. And then when they hear that music anywhere now, they think back of a family dinner. And you said something really important. We had 3 kids, didn't have 8, but we had 3. All 3 of them communicated very differently in any given dinner. At any given dinner, one of them would be chatty. One of them might be quiet. The chatty one, you let them run. Let him or her just go. Tell them about their day, whatever it was, run with the topic and just smile and absorb it, pull more stuff out of them. The quiet one's okay. Maybe they had a quiet day. If they were quiet more than 3 days in a row, my wife would tap me in the shoulder. We talked that night and she goes, something going on with so-and-so. The other aspect of what you described that's important is they need to see how you treat each other as parents. And at a family dinner, there's a really good opportunity every single day for your kids to see you love each other and be kind to each other and do the dishes or help each other or whatever, and get into a little bit of a routine. Routines are good for kids. They're good to see that there's a routine, right? You said, I've taken so many notes. And by the way, during a podcast, I'm always trying to think of what I name a podcast.
I know you do that. I'm like excited. What is he going to pull out?
Oh, it's principles and versus practices. When you said that right away, I'm like, that is brilliant. There's so much there. And then, I talk to a lot of coaches, a lot of people that are doing consulting work. And when I ask them to tell me what they do, I get a very flowery description of, you gave us very specific things that you look for and that you work on that anyone listening to this would benefit from, right? If they just get one takeaway. And I know as a 53-year-old, I need coaching every day, right? I get coaching from you. I get coaching from the people that I've interviewed in my podcast, my parents, my brothers, my spouse, good friends of mine are not afraid to knock me upside the head and say, buddy, you've got this wrong. So none of us have got it all figured out. Some of us have figured out specific parts of livelihood that they can learn and share with others. Like you've got this here, right? If I want business advice, I'm going to go talk to my brother. I may not ask him advice in other categories, but if I want to know how to start, he's brilliant at it.
Yeah.
Right. So when you think about this race you just did in the Grand Canyon, and you think about helping other parents in difficult situations, at what point during that race, when you were with your brother, did you have to dig deep to help him? And how did you guys work through that? What was it that got you through it? It's kind of an amazing part of the story.
Yeah, it's funny. I think we referenced this yesterday, actually. So when we were in the Grand Canyon a month ago, we went and we did a trial run. We did rim to rim to rim, 50 miles. and it was brutal heat and it was incredibly difficult. But we talked about actually Jesse Itzler, and we talked about one of his experiences. My brother had just found Jesse Itzler and was talking about it. And he said, he started training with this ultra marathon trainer. I don't know if it was Goggins or somebody else when he did this, but he said he hit this point like mile 30 or something where he just hit the wall and he's like, I can't do it. And he's like, and he said the trainer, and I don't know if it's Goggins or not, but he said that whoever his coach was looked him right in the eye and said, you know what? You feel amazing. And everybody that we see, you are going to go run up to them and you are going to tell them how amazing you feel. And I don't know what it was, but when we went back in October, anytime we started to hurt, it was like, but I don't hurt, Mike. I feel amazing and I'm doing great. And we're going to have the best run of our life. And truly, like when we think about those beliefs that hijack us, it's those beliefs that creep in and are like, why should I try? My spouse doesn't want to get on the same page with me. She never listens to me. My kids have behavioral issues. My kids are running rampant. My kids won't even care if I'm at dinner. Those are those beliefs that we let them in and we give them space, and they are like a cancer to our potential. And so when we're in the Grand Canyon and I'm looking at this huge feat that I had never done, my little brother had done it 2 years before, held the FKT for it, had done it in 22 hours. And I'm looking at this thing, I'm thinking, I just don't want to die. But just that conversation from 1 month earlier, I was like, that is where I need to be. And so we did that. And it was a matter of like snapping back, definitely digging deep, following a plan, having a strategy all the way through to where he kept me tempered. And that's that intensity component. A lot of people will feel guilty and they'll just dial that intensity up. And that leads to burnout. It leads to injury. It leads to overwhelm, when it just honestly shouldn't be that hard. But if we skipped over the consistency and the correct, and we've jumped to intensity, it's going to be that hard.
A couple important nuggets there, right? You were with your brother. He was with you, right? Having someone next to you on a journey like this, whether it's a coach, a spouse, a sister, a friend, someone you can confide in, is important, just to share your feelings.
Necessary, for sure.
And, we talked about Jesse Itzler in the book he wrote, Living with a SEAL. All right. So he did live with David Goggins for 31 days in his apartment in New York. And if you don't know who David Goggins is, look up the book, You Can't Hurt Me, and read it. It's impressive. But David Goggins said something really important that Jesse grabbed onto, and both Jesse and David are amazing people. They have a lot of things. Jesse's podcast is great, just amazing. David said, when your brain says no, you're at 40% of your capacity. Think about that. Look, if your brain says I'm done, you still have 40%. You still have 60% of your bandwidth left, right? Physically, mentally, whatever. You haven't even halfway. For those that are thinking about going on a journey with Jared or need some serious life coaching, when you think your spouse won't listen to you, when you think you've lost your kids, you haven't. You haven't at all. And I'll share another tip that I think people might find valuable, particularly when it comes to relationships. When you're facing a difficult time, and by the way, spouses can get misaligned, right? They can get misaligned. They're just not connecting with each other. And by the way, that happens in any marriage. I don't care what you say. It happens in any marriage.
Or how good, right?
And my wife and I have been blessed. We're going to celebrate 30 years next year. And we've had, like my wife says, we've had 25 amazing years of marriage. What we have discovered, and it works incredibly well, in the very few times where we've been out of alignment. It's been typically around significant life events, right? A death in the family, financial struggles, work stress, whatever. One of the kids just not where we think they should be and worrying about it. When we got to the point where we couldn't communicate, we would write each other a letter, literally sit down and write a letter and sleep on it and then send it to each other. And what happens when you do that, it removes all of the emotion. You can collect your thoughts and you can say, this is how I'm feeling. And we have never had a situation that was not resolved with a letter. And it allows you to read and hear what they're saying in an objective manner and think to yourself, how am I processing this? And it's instant. It's literally instant relief on how you're feeling with each other. So as people are listening to this and they think they can't be helped, think about being in the canyon, right? Where you're out of gas, you got 45 more miles to go. You probably have way more capacity than you think. If you think you're at the end of the rope with your family or your kids, you're not. I would also admit it depends on the age your kids are when they come to you. If your kids are teenagers, this might be a tougher road.
Yeah.
If your kids are little, they're resilient, right? Yeah. There's ways to come back. The mission you're on right now, this mission isn't profit driven. This mission is mission driven.
Absolutely.
So if you leave yourself with one message to the people hearing this that might be thinking to themselves, man, I could probably use Jared's help. What's the one thing that prevents people from reaching out that you can help them understand?
Yeah, I think it is a lot of times it is this idea that I should be able to do this on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I should be able to do this alone. I'm a grown man or a grown woman, or I'm older, or I've been at this for a long time. I should be able to do it on my own. And the fact of the matter is we just don't do anything on our own.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't. From the time we were very, very little, we have, most of us, grown up in a very specific structure where we have had a mentor, a guide, a teacher, a coach who's pulling us along.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times personal growth, it has that degree of suffering. And sometimes we can voluntarily choose to step into suffering. And other times we have to be pulled into suffering. Let me be incredibly clear. Suffering is a part of the journey. It's going to happen. You can either choose or you can, just let it happen. Right. I prefer voluntary suffering. And sometimes I'm asking people to pull me along. And sometimes I'm stepping full into it and just driving forward myself. So don't beat yourself up thinking I should be able to do it on my own. Really evaluate how much progress have you made on your own. And it doesn't have to be even a coach. There's tons of coaches out there who, anytime I say, hey, you need help, you can't do it alone, they're like, great, now everybody's going to call me. No, it doesn't have to be a coach, but you need people that you can go to and say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Can you help me?
100%. And it could be a friend, it could be a sister-in-law, it could be your pastor, it could be anybody that you think would listen to you and be a sounding board. I'll leave everyone with this and we'll close. If you're considering and if you're facing something in your life that you just can't get your arms around, there's nothing else more you should invest your time and your money in than your family, period, right? If you think of anything you're going to spend money on the next 60 days, and if you don't have this right, this is where it needs to go. It's the best investment you can make. So, Jared, just a pleasure having you on the program. We're very fortunate to have guests on here who bring real life experiences, and you've had some, but who also bring real life solid advice. And it's a joy to watch you see you do what you do, and can't wait to continue to follow you and get you on the program down the road and see how things are going.
I appreciate being here. I'm a huge fan and just think of you as an amazing leader, an amazing mentor. And so I'm just totally honored to be here. So I really appreciate it, Pete.
It's our pleasure. Jared, have a wonderful holiday season. And this will come out probably early January or early 2022, and people will be looking forward to it.
There you go. Happy New Year.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Thanks for checking out Eating Crow. Like and subscribe so you never miss a video.